Welcome to A Way Forward. My name is Maaria. I'm your host, and this is a show where we break the digital echo chamber. And we're in our second season now of Conversations, and I'm very excited to dig in deeper and connect us more and connect policies and humanity one conversation at a time. My guest today is going to help us think about a way forward when it comes to using the tools of state government to improve our lives, especially in times of fear, distrust, and unfortunately misinformation. State Representative Anna Moeller is a Democrat representing the 43rd District of Illinois. Since taking office, Representative Moeller has championed legislation on pay equity and worker protections, consumer protections, healthcare access and affordability, government reform, environmental protection, nursing home and Medicaid reform, support for young victims of sexual assault, pro-choice legislation, and bills that advance LGBTQ equality. That's a long list of agenda items, and I thank you for your service, and I thank you for your time and giving us the opportunity to dig in deep with you. Welcome to A Way Forward, Representative Moeller.
Thank you so much, Maaria. It's so wonderful to be here with you.
I know the schedule is busy for various reasons. We are at a time in our country where we're seeing a lot of division. And because it is so front in mind of us, I want to bring this up. When we're witnessing the scenes and the news out of Minneapolis, the whole country's watching. And with federal immigration and enforcement and everything that's happened in Chicago, in LA, and other cities in Portland, it's only escalating, unfortunately. I can say that as a lawyer and a policymaker, I am very, very concerned of where we are heading. Yeah. You made a statement about your and your colleagues' actions in the State House recently in response to the constituent concerns, because I think everybody wants to know, how do we fix this? No matter what side of the aisle you are on, how do we move forward? Can you share your thoughts on what's happening and also what actions are being taken here in the state of Illinois?
Sure. Well, like so many, and as you alluded to, I share the deep concerns that we have about what's happening in our country right now, especially around immigration enforcement and the actions of ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. I think we are in unprecedented times with the trampling of constitutional rights, the violation of people's civil liberties, and just the fear and terror that the federal government is creating in so many communities. Communities like, as you mentioned, Minneapolis, Portland, here in Chicago, and indeed in my own community in Elgin. We've seen ICE actions that are just unbelievable, and they don't create an environment of safety. They don't create an environment of trust. They create an environment of fear and terror. And so I think it's really important that people understand that they're people who are concerned about this issue and are concerned about the direction this country is moving in, understand that they're part of the majority. And the sentiment, I believe, of the majority of Americans is that this is unacceptable and not the country that we want to live in. And as an elected official, I feel it's my responsibility to let my constituents know and let the broader public understand that I too reject and oppose these actions, and that there are many who are working to end these activities that we're seeing. Although we're at the state level and ICE and Department of Homeland Security are run under the federal Trump administration, there's a lot that we can do at the state level to help protect our residents. And so the things that I called out in my statement include legislation that we have passed in prior years and just recently that limit the activities of local law enforcement in helping ICE with their enforcement activities, creating safe spaces in schools, in hospitals, and other community venues where ICE might try to apprehend people, creating a legal path so that when someone's civil rights have been violated, they can find legal remedies at the state level to hold those ICE officers or Department of Homeland Security officers accountable. And that we're speaking out, that we're not being silent, that we're not allowing these things to happen, and being complicit with silence. We are very we need to be very vocal in letting our residents know, especially immigrants who might be feeling very scared, very vulnerable, for very good reason, to know that they're being supported by elected officials and other community members in their communities. And that's why I made the statement that I made.
I appreciate your statement, and I appreciate you also taking the affirmative stance that you have to let your opinion known. Do you see, when you're speaking to your constituents, do you see people that are on both sides of the aisle that are saying, no, we are very supportive of the Constitution and we have to take a stance of how we can actually do immigration enforcement safely?
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, I do hear from folks who disagree with the position that I've taken and the position that most of my colleagues have taken, the governor of Illinois have taken. And I think part of that is a misunderstanding of immigration policy in our country. The fact that being here as an undocumented person is a misdemeanor, it's not a felony. And the way that ICE is enforcing immigration is just way beyond, appropriate for what the violation is. It's interesting because we passed the Trust Act, which is the foundation for how the state of Illinois is approaching ICE. We passed that legislation at the beginning of the last Trump administration, and actually a Republican governor signed that bill, Bruce Rauner, with recognition that it's important that local law enforcement not be caught up in ICE activities because, well, one, it's not their jurisdiction. Immigration is a federal issue and a federal policy. We can't set immigration policy at the state or local level. And two, it's incredibly important that you create trust in communities between local governments, local law enforcement, and the people that they serve. And if they are engaged in immigration enforcement, you erode and break that trust. And that's why we called it the Trust Act. We want community members, regardless of their citizen status, to feel that they can go to law enforcement if there is criminal activity happening or if they feel unsafe. And the Trust Act was passed to reinforce that goal. And we've had to strengthen it in the meantime because of what's happened with the second Trump administration. And we've also, I think, another important policy and another important action that we've taken at the state level is the creation of an accountability commission that is analyzing and taking testimony from citizens and residents who feel that their civil liberties have been violated by ICE, so that either now or into the future, those officers can be held accountable. And we're not waiting, for the Trump administration to end. This was an executive order that the governor passed, which I'm very appreciative of. We want people to understand that we still live in a nation of laws and rules and the Constitution. And regardless of who the president is and his administration, we're gonna operate under those rules and regulations and under the Constitution. And I think it's just incredibly important that we set that precedent and that people feel protected.
Absolutely. And I thank you for bringing up the Accountability Commission because, for people that are listening, a lot of people don't know how to actually impact without being an elected official. And the Accountability Commission is a commission where you can take your concerns forward and you can even give policy recommendations. I know I've been in conversation with people from that commission, and they're looking for people to put their thoughts and their concerns. And so this is a partnership. When you see this happening and you feel something is incorrect, it's elected officials and the individuals that are watching this happen. And it cannot succeed. Like, we cannot come to the other side if we don't work together. I know that there's a lot of people right now even elected officials are kind of posturing how to make their position clear and what steps to take to do it safely. And a lot of people are looking to the elected officials for that leadership, right? And I think for many, they're probably concerned and scared to even entering politics because of what they're seeing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, because we're in the thick of this now, we're absolutely in the thick of this, right? For every concern that one would have, what could possibly go wrong when you're an elected official? What is the most difficult challenge I could face? We're in the thick of it. So what motivated you, think now that you're really living out that process in a real way, what made it for you to kind of cross that threshold and say, I'm going to enter into this field now, 10 years ago? What was the core motivating factor for you?
So, I was one of those people who I've always been very interested in government. I've always been very interested in working in a capacity that helps to improve public life. I'm a government nerd. I was, in Girl Scouts growing up. I was in student council in high school. I was in student government when I was in college. I've just always really loved government. It makes me sound so exciting, so fascinating. But it's just something public service is something I've always been drawn to. So my professional training is actually I have a master's degree in public administration, history degree, and a poli-sci minor. So it was always something that I was, drawn to. And I knew I wanted to work in some level of public service. I never really thought I'd ever run for office, though. I was always kind of a more behind the scenes kind of a person. But I started getting involved in my community here in Elgin way back when we moved here in the early 2000s. And I served on our Human Relations Commission. I served on our Plan Commission. Was very involved in my kids' PTO. And I was involved in my neighborhood association. And it was during a local city council race back in 2009 when I decided that maybe running for office is something that I need to do to amplify my voice and kind of put my money where my mouth is. We had hosted a candidates forum through our neighborhood association. And one of the candidates told us that his platform for running was to make life as difficult as possible for illegal aliens in Elgin. This is 2009, right? And there was like this movement. My community is at least 50% Hispanic and has traditionally been an immigrant community. And we moved here because it's a diverse community and we wanted to live in a diverse community. There was a movement kind of happening in Elgin. We were in a transitional phase in the history of the community where you could see, people feeling threatened by newcomers and by the changing demographics. And he represented that, this candidate. And unfortunately, he won. He got elected to the city council. And so that's why I decided, if I'm going to really be able to have any kind of influence and try to provide leadership on how this community is governed and what the tone is, I might have to run for city council. So the following cycle I did in 2011, I got elected to the Elgin City Council and I served with this individual, unfortunately, and we went head to head on a lot of issues. And I felt like it was important for me to do that because, again, like the thought of having him and others like him set the tone for our community would just be so damaging and make people who feel in our community, so unwelcome and so outside of the system and the process and just not represented. And so that was my initial foray into elected politics. And then in 2014, I ended up, I was appointed to the state rep position after the former state rep was, he was doing some very awful things and he needed to resign. And so I was appointed to fill his position. And it's been the biggest honor of my life, to be in this role since then. And It's been a learning experience. There are still aspects of being an elected official that I'm not entirely comfortable with. I think women and I don't want to generalize, but there are parts of being an elected official I think that are more challenging than others for women, and that's fundraising and kind of grandstanding type of activity.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think, first of all, I want to say you're talking to a government nerd as well. I was student body president too, in I think undergrad and law school, and I'm like obsessed with trying to solve problems, and I think that's what I hear from you as well. And so I think that's where it starts, and that's what you actually displayed in the story you told of watching this candidate forum and seeing someone there, and then someone really believing that this is how they want things to be. So if they're taking the mic and they're taking the position, who's
Right.
going to oppose that?
Exactly.
What I find interesting is what you described, that you went head to head. Because I think a lot of people feel like once you enter politics and you enter into the space, it's like nonstop arguments, nonstop turf war, nonstop. And when you went head to head, it's like, were you surprised by the fact that you went head to head and then you get over it and then you have your opinions and then you move on and you end up introducing something that really is something that you want to see and it makes impactful change?
Yeah. I guess this is a message to anyone who is interested and who has a passion for, who just is concerned about, the direction of our country, the direction of their community, the direction of their state, to not be intimidated by the process and to not write off the idea that you can either be an elected or have some type of impact on the system and on the process. It's not as intimidating as it may seem.
And I think that's what's beautiful to hear for a lot of people, right? It's like you just grow with the role. You
Right.
become the role.
Right.
I mean, this going head to head and then coming, creating policy together and bringing opposing sides together. It's complicated work. And I know that we worked together on the women and girls legislation, and that was such a success. And I'm so thankful. And I think the process of policymaking is not very clear to everybody. So I wanted to know, I know that you've had 10 years of elected office, but is there one legislation that stands out for you that you're like, gosh, it just felt so good when those votes came in?
I've been fortunate to have a couple of bills that I've really, worked hard on and cared really deeply about that have passed and been signed into law. The Council on Women and Girls was a great bill, and I was grateful to work with you on that. It wouldn't have happened without your insight and helping to draft that legislation and your advocacy on that. But I have to say, this is not like the sexiest of policies, but nursing home reform in Illinois is something that that I'm very proud of and want to continue to build on. The way that we treat the most vulnerable in our communities really reflects on who we are as a society. There's a saying about how you treat your children and your old people is a reflection of, the health and morality of your community. And far too often in many of our long-term care facilities, we see people being neglected, abused, and just getting, very terrible care at an industry that makes big profits off of the care that they provide. And their profits are subsidized by federal and state dollars. And for a very long time, that industry has been allowed to kind of operate with impunity. And the COVID-19 pandemic, like in so many other areas of injustice in our society, shed a light on how people are treated in long-term care. And we saw the majority of people who passed away from COVID-19 at the beginning of the pandemic were people living in long-term care facilities. And that really kind of initiated a hard look at how these facilities are being operated and how they're funded and how they're being held accountable. And so back in 2022, I sponsored a bill in the House, and Ann Gillespie, who's now the director of insurance. She was in the Senate at the time. We passed landmark legislation reforming that industry and reforming how we pay for long-term care in Illinois. And just recently, it came out there was a report that came out that shows that those reforms have shown quantifiable improvements in the quality of care and the quality of life of people in long-term care facilities. And we are the nation leader in that. And unfortunately, the Biden administration had actually taken up many of those reforms at the federal level. But now we see President Trump they just rolled back protections that the Biden administration had put in. And so I'm very thankful that we have those protections and regulations here in place in Illinois, because they will be protected under state law, even if the federal government doesn't protect them.
That's amazing because, even if it's rolled back at the federal level, people can look at it as a model. If there's advocacy and education around what Illinois has done, then other states are motivated to follow the same. I want to dig in a little bit on this. You touched on it about the challenges specifically as a woman elected official. And I know that there's a funding, raising funds. That's one piece of it. But I want to talk about the fact that the United States has never had a president that has been a woman. And around the world, there's been so many countries that have had heads of state that have been women. And we advance globally in the narrative that we are a first world country and we are advanced and progressive, but there's so many countries that have already done this. What do you think is the issue here? Why we haven't seen a woman president, and how has that manifested for you in a real way in your role as a state elected official?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always interesting, and when you look at like the history of progress that we've made in our country, we do see ourselves as a very advanced and sophisticated democracy in the world. We're the world's largest economy until probably recently, lead the world with our institutions, our culture, our influence, et cetera. And I think we forget, though, that for the most of our history, women, people of color, have not had equal rights. It's only been a little over 100 years since women have had the right to vote. It's only been a little over 50 years that women have had the ability to be financially independent. We no longer have reproductive rights in half of our country after, enjoying those rights for a little over 50 years. So I think there is so much progress that needs to be made still in recognizing the equality of women, recognizing the equality of people of color in our country, and the fact that we haven't had a woman, we've only had one person of color who's been president, is reflective of this, long and terrible history that we have in the United States. I'm optimistic that things are changing, that we will see a woman in our lifetimes become president. But right now we're in a cultural backlash that's fighting against the gains that we made. And it's all the more reason that we have to, work even harder to try to reclaim the rights that we had before. Women get penalized, preaching to the choir here, you've seen it, but women get penalized when they behave in a certain way that are markers for strong leadership. And it puts us in this, box and creates this dilemma. There's a cultural desire to view women in a certain way and to want women to behave in a certain way, which might be counter to how we want
what we need. What we need
to operate. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's two things to have like an on the ground conversation on this. It's like, I always feel like the media has a huge role in how you portray women and girls and what you encourage them and what you entice them and what you sell to them, as early as 10 years old. And I think the uplifting of the smart girl, right? Uplifting of the Anna, who's 15 or 16 running for student government, right? Uplifting that girl as the cool girl, I think matters. It absolutely matters. It changes people's mind and their perception. And it reminds people of their worth, really. So I think the media 100% plays a huge role. So we started this conversation with what's happening in Minneapolis, and this conversation is going to continue. We're going to be watching a few of these things on the nightly news for people that are not policymakers or elected officials, and they're watching this happen. And I think the question is, how does a person watching this happen and afraid to leave the house, afraid to leave the house without their passport, afraid to interfere, right? Disrupt. And I mean disrupt in a way where you see someone being harmed and your human capacity is like, this is not right. This can escalate. I got to step in. So we've seen those scenarios not end well. How does a person watching this and not wanting to be just a bystander and just receive what's happening, how do they move forward? And what is your message to every person watching this? How do they move forward in this time?
Well, as terrible a time as it is, and as frightening as it can be for so many people, to me, there are signs of hope. There are signs of what makes our country great, that we see on a daily basis. I've never seen communities come together like I've seen in the last several months. I'll give you an example. I was in Elgin in early December when we had an ICE standoff, a 5-hour ICE standoff. And there were hundreds of bystanders there who were very concerned about the gentleman who was the target of the ICE operation. And they were there in solidarity with him in freezing temperatures, stayed there all day. And then there were community members supporting the community members who were there supporting him, bringing hot coffee and pizza and hand warmers and, just moral support. It's bringing out the worst, with our government in a lot of ways, but it's also bringing out the best of who we are. And just seeing like the people who are out in the streets in Minneapolis, out in the streets in Chicago, all over the country, even in places where you wouldn't expect. I think this is waking people up to what it really means to be an American and what it really means to live in a democracy, that you have to make your voice heard and you have to be engaged, or else we're going to lose it. And I see people being very engaged and putting themselves in danger to protect people that they don't even know, because they care about them and they care about their communities. And so as much as it's scary and alarming and depressing to see what's happening, I think we also need to recognize like the real beautiful things that are happening out in the streets and amongst people supporting each other, and go from there. This is our time to decide, like, you cannot be passive and you can't be just a spectator. Democracy demands citizen engagement. And if this Trump administration has done anything, it's demonstrated the absolute need for people to be involved and engaged. And I see that happening, and I hope it continues and gets even stronger.
And it's beautiful. It's beautiful for you to say that. And we end it with that too, because this is, like we said, we started in the beginning. Protecting democracy is not a partisan issue, number one. Number two, that there's an inner moral compass that makes people come out and just to provide coffee because they feel like, no, that's not right. Something's not right, And I think sometimes people need to be reminded that voice that you feel that you're watching this, you're like, yeah, I really do believe in the policies, but something's not right. Like, that's not right. And that's okay. You don't have to belong to a certain political camp. You can just follow that gut and that humanity. And then we can find a way forward. So I appreciate you. And I appreciate you, Anna, so much for your time and for your words.
Thank you, Maaria. And thank you for these conversations that you are putting out there. Very important.